Hi, welcome everyone. Welcome to Voice to Action, Speak, Participate, and Vote. I'm Harold Miller. I'm Executive Director for the New York City Racial Justice Commission, and very excited to moderate this panel this afternoon and looking forward to having a discussion with some good friends of mine who is sharing this panel with me. Today, we want to, focus on with so much going on in New York City, the power of input, the power of engagement. And we are talking to some critical folks that's doing this work on a daily basis to engage New Yorkers on the work that is happening in their respective fields. So today, in no particular order, I am joined by Dr. Sarah Sayeed, who is the chair of the New York City Civic Engagement Commission. I have Laura Rogg, who is Chief Service Officer for NYC Service. Jennifer Jones Austin, who is our chair for the New York City Racial Justice Commission and also CEO for the Federation of Protestant Welfare Agencies. We have Dr. Shango Blake, co-executive director for NYC Speaks, and Manuel Castro, commissioner for Mayor's Office of Immigrant Affairs. So to start, we're gonna throw out a series of questions. If you have a question during the time that you're listening in, please feel free to send it in into the various chat boxes, or if you're watching us on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, use those handles as well to send any questions our way, and we'll try to add them into our discussion. But first, love to uh, get a sense from, and I'm play favorites here. I'm going to go with our chair for this Racial Justice Commission, Jennifer Jones Austin, and start ask a question in why is community input important to your work? Just to
So,
start us off.
first, let me just thank everybody for listening in and being a part of this conversation. Not just those of us who are serving as panelists and as moderator, although I'm excited to hear from all of you, but all who've joined in to listen in and be a part, because listening in and engaging is the very first step in being a part of civic engagement and being a part of the process. Community input is so critically important. I think it was said best when the book Winners Take All was written. This notion that for so long here in America, when it comes to dealing with the issues that concern so many of us, there's always somebody else telling us what's best for us. We live in this this society that is very paternal in nature. It is those who are privileged, those who've held power, who know what is best for the rest of us. And we have to lean in as individuals, as families, as community members, not just community leaders, but of all of us saying, what I believe, what I say, what I feel matters. And so when taking up the issue of justice, fairness, and equity, everyday New Yorkers, individuals, with lived experience have to bring their thoughts, their ideas, informed by their experiences to the table. Because otherwise, we're just going to be in a situation where those who've long been in power, those who've had the privilege of deciding what is best for the rest of us, are just going to keep on acting like that privilege continues, despite all that we know and all that should be different. That's why community input is so critically important. And that's what we sought to do with the Racial Justice Commission's work. Yes, we had people on the commission who look like me, look like several of us who, are gathered here today, people of color, people who represent different genders, different gender identities, ethnicities. That was important, and we were bringing our lived experiences, but they weren't necessarily, we weren't speaking for I wasn't speaking for every Black person in New York City. I couldn't speak for every woman. I could, so we needed to hear from people who may look like me, but have a different experience than me. That's why community input is so important.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, and making sure that we hear multiple voices and hearing, different points of view is always critical, and I totally agree with that. Dr. Blake, what's your thoughts on that?
I couldn't agree more with what Dr. Austin said about raising the voice of everyday people. I recall one time I had a great opportunity of speaking to an educational equity warrior by the name of Dr. Adelaide Sanford, who um, went on to be the vice chancellor of the uh, Board of Regents in the state of New York. And I asked her a question about equity. And her response was that in order to understand equity, we have to go to the people who have been treated unequal and ask them to give their definition of equity. And when I think research is a great instrument in capturing the voices of New Yorkers. I agree that I can have an individual perspective or point of view, that there's no community that's monolithic, that things are nuanced, and research brings that out. It brings out the great themes, it brings out the nuanced points of view. And so um, I think that community input is critical to governance. I agree that this paternalistic approach to leadership is something that is creating a great divide, a great gap between the government and municipalities and the people that they're supposed to service and represent. This is Black History Month. There's a whole history of institutional racism that has happened in America, and when you bring community voice, people's voice, people who have been often marginalized and disenfranchised into the fold, to give them an opportunity to share their perspectives and their point of view with the governments or the agencies that are there to service them, then what you have is the beginning of the building of trust, if in fact that those voices are acted upon. Let me just say this, I had an opportunity to look at the Racial Justice Commission and look at the Civic Commission, and our work as NYC Speaks. Our goal is not to duplicate what already exists in the way of research, but every good piece of research should leave you asking more questions. And so this is our little input to what already exists, but we're doing it in a way that I think is very inclusive. We're looking at this as the FUBU of research, in the sense that it's for us, by us, that those who actually ask the questions on a survey that is being distributed as we speak. Um, it was done by members of the community, branching out into communities that often aren't represented, reaching out to our Black, brown, immigrant, Asian communities in a way that really gives them voice, that quantifies a mandate for this administration. So this is an attempt to really change the way in which government relates to community and community responds to government, with the standpoint of building trust moving forward.
Oh, yeah, that is really refreshing to hear, and knowing that NYC Speaks have that approach is really great to know. And I know with Dr. Sarah Saeed and we worked closely together for several years doing community work, and we have spoken many hours because our desks were literally next to each other in the office about uh, you know the struggles that we saw about this paternalistic take on engagement and bringing people in. So I'm curious, Sarah, just to hear your thoughts as well.
Yeah, first, thank you so much. This is such an exciting opportunity to be speaking with all of you as leaders in how we're engaging communities. And it's not like a one stop, like one time thing, like we have to keep doing it on an ongoing basis. So I'm so happy that we're having this conversation. Harold, if you remember when we were at CAU, is when the story of CEC began, the Civic Engagement Commission came into existence, citywide participatory budgeting as a mandate came into existence, as that itself is an example of how public feedback can concretely shape policy, right? And the establishment of a new office in city government. Um, we looking back in 2018, we were having public feedback sessions so that we could decide how people wanted to reform or change the charter, and those were then distilled into ballot measures. And it's similar to what's happening now with the Racial Justice Commission. And looking back at that process, I always like to remind myself about the number of people who came out to vote. Numbers of people who are coming out to vote are not that high. Obviously, that's a space where we need to improve. But thinking back to that ballot measure, nearly 1.5 million people in New York City voted on that question, and of those, like 2/3 voted for yes to create the commission. So I think this is a very concrete example of how people's input makes a difference. And the Civic Engagement Commission is charged in the charter with enhancing civic participation to enhance civic trust and strengthen democracy. So that's also really, important, like, language and framing that I think we need to keep in mind, because it's assuming that greater participation means that we have a stronger democracy, right? Mm-hmm. More people speaking up, more people participating, more people voting. And we also need to be thinking about how do people speaking up, how does that translate into action? Because it's not just about speaking. People need to see results. And that's how trust is built. Like, when people feel heard, they see results, that's when they become more trusting of government. And I wanted to just close out by saying, like, it's the nature of our democracy that it is built and strengthened by people who speak up and act together to weave our government together, right? And it's our collective responsibility to protect democracy, because we all know we can't take it for granted. And we don't want other people speaking for us. And it takes work. It takes effort. It takes time. And I really see all of us on the call, all the people who are out there listening, we're all here because we want to protect democracy. And we want to protect civic engagement. And I'm so excited, again, to have this conversation and partner with everybody.
No, thank you. And I think one of the touchstones of the work that you're doing is the participatory budgeting process, which is critical because it actually gives people direct access to, like, how their tax dollars is being used in their community. Tell us a little bit about exactly how folks are engaging on that. What is the response? What's people's feelings on the ground?
Yeah, I can say a little bit more about this in more detail later. Like, I'll share more about the actual processes. But the Civic Engagement Commission did run a participatory budgeting process with youth last year called It's Our Money. And we had youth identify their most pressing needs during the pandemic. We had CBO partners, like, creating project ideas, young people voting on those, and we awarded 5 CBOs contracts to run those winning projects. And right now we're running a process in the 33 neighborhoods that have been hardest hit by COVID-19, as designated by the Task Force for Racial Inclusion and Equity. And we had a little bit over 29,000 people vote on projects, and that process is winding down. And then we'll be starting citywide participatory budgeting very soon in the near future.
That's awesome to hear. That's awesome to hear, especially it's coming from young people. And, we'll talk a little bit more about, different sectors of our population participating. But I want to carry on the conversation about, the process of of development policy and initiatives. Love to hear from Commissioner Castro. I know you're newly installed into the Office of Immigrant Affairs, but but I know you have tons of experience working alongside the agency in your previous role at NICE and everything like that. So I just want to get your take on it as well.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for the invitation to participate and join this incredible group of panelists. Yes, as you mentioned, Harold, I was recently appointed to this agency, and I'm very honored to be able to lead the Mayor's Office of Immigrant Affairs. I was just recently at New Immigrant Community Empowerment, an agency that works with newly arrived immigrants directly on the ground in immigrant densely populated neighborhoods. And certainly a lot of my work involved working with day laborers, domestic workers, delivery workers, and folks who were experiencing the brunt of the issues that were coming up during the pandemic and prior to the pandemic during the previous presidential administration. And it was so important for us to get the real time input about what was happening, not just concretely with with their work in their neighborhoods, in the streets where they were looking for work, but also what were their fears, what were their hopes. A lot of this was so critical to organize campaigns and bring people together in very difficult circumstances. NICE has a worker center in Jackson Heights, Queens, one of the earliest epicenters of the pandemic, for instance. And it was all that work, that community organizing work, bringing folks together in meetings, in even cultural and social events that helped us bring people together in response to this crisis. And so now at Moya, this agency has worked for many years to collaborate and build the capacity of agencies like NICE. We partner on a lot of different projects. And what I'd like to do here is continue to do that work directly with community-based organizations to truly be responsive for when the next crisis happens, we actually understand how to respond. One of the big issues is, how do we become a trusted agency where people can come forward with their issues, with their problems, with things going on, in their neighborhoods, whether it's human trafficking or issues with another city agency. Well, that trust is built over time with constant communication, dialogue with community organizations, with trusted leaders, and with the community itself. And we'd like to continue to cultivate that at the agency, because now we've learned, not just through COVID, but most recently a few weeks ago, the big fire in the Bronx. We need to be in communication with leaders on the ground to know how to appropriately respond. A few days after the fire, in the news, immediately it was not a story about an immigrant community impacted by this, but quickly everyone realized, oh, we need to get interpretation services. We need to work with CBOs on the ground that had been working with this community of primarily West African immigrants to make sure that they have the resources and information uh, available to them. And so we set up a service center. And Moya had staff on the ground to be able to provide that. And so to replicate that and improve on that is just so critical for us. But certainly, my experience at NICE is going to inform a lot of my work at Moya. And I hope that we can do a lot of work to support the leaders on the ground and get community input as much as possible, because that's truly going to allow us to respond to crisis and be better at our work over time.
No, I appreciate the fact that you talk. I was going to bring up the Bronx fire because I have friends who work within the agency who work alongside Moya, and talked about how immediately your team was on the ground, ensuring that folks had information about resources and services, and those critical in those hours immediately after the fire, where in previous years they could have been left out for days to weeks without the information available for them. And so engagement in that sense of like in the emergency response sense is like something that has been so needed in particularly immigrant communities, when unfortunately tragedies like this happens. It leaves communities in the dark about what is available for them. I'm happy that you highlighted that. I was gonna bring that up, just see your thoughts are. So thank you. Laura, we're talking about engagement, and as the chief service officer for the city, how has input shaped the work that NYC Service does?
Yeah, thanks so much, Harold. And thank you to everybody in the audience and my fellow panelists. I'm excited to be a part of this conversation that we've all been having for many years in city government, and to be able to really connect with people across New York City. And I'd say for me, a big part of what my role encompasses is challenging traditional notions of what volunteerism means and what it means to be a volunteer. I think volunteering oftentimes is set up as like, oh, this is something that's nice that you do when you have free time, and very much sets it up in a way that you're bestowing something onto somebody else or onto a community of people. And it really misses, oftentimes when people think about it in that way, it misses the power we all have as community members, how we come together to build out the community that we want to see and that we want to help thrive. So I'll put this in the chat, but we actually did a study, I think about 4 years ago, and Harold and Sarah both were part of this and helped us, in many aspects of it. With this survey, we went out and went door to door and talked to over 850 people in Western Queens, and then also hosted several focus groups and talked to almost 80 people. Once we got the results, kind of getting people's ideas and what they thought about it. And what was so fundamental was the survey was about how and where people were engaging, how many people are engaging across New York City. And traditionally, New York City has always been seen as one of the lower, like in comparison with other cities, one of the lowest rates of volunteerism. And all of us, when we started to talk about this, the idea of doing this survey, we all knew that wasn't the truth, that we were in communities, we knew how engaged people were, and wanted to set out to find a different way. So I won't get into the logistics. The study's there if you really want to know about how we did it. But what we were able to do is we added in a question about faith-based involvement. So in addition to just have you volunteered, where are you volunteering? Because oftentimes people don't think of just everyday things they're doing, on behalf of their house of worship, on behalf of a faith-based group in their neighborhood, more local grassroots things like, volunteering in mutual aid groups, or just, so many ways that people come together and support their neighbors. And so for us, that the survey really truly, it shifted the way we thought about service, and we're able to talk about service. So it shifted into, we're not coming into this saying something's missing and we as the city need to go in and fill that gap with our volunteer support. It was recognizing how much was going on. The rates we saw were triple what normally are reported on a national level. And especially when we added the faith-based question, that skyrocketed volunteer rates in Black and Brown communities. And so again, we were just looking at a more inclusive way of how we talk about service and volunteerism. And so for us, it helped us to very much shift and solidify, how do we support communities in building themselves up? That they already know what they need. They just need resources. They need funding. They need people power. They need to figure out how they can include more people in their neighborhood and reach more people in their neighborhood, both in service, but then also to include them as a part of it. And so for us, what it really did is it helped us to start shifting funding. So we now fund communities through our Civic Impact Funding grants. And that was something that we've been able to stand up during COVID, and hope to continue, of just getting funding in to support volunteer managers and needs that come around volunteering. We've also built out a lot of trainings for nonprofits and smaller grassroots organizations on just how can you bring in more people? How do you manage them? How do you retain volunteers? So that we're really going in and just really allowing people to magnify their impact. So I think, Harold, that's really been, the huge ways that we've been able to do this, and then have these relationships already built. So when things like disasters strike, when city agencies are looking to get more resources out, we have all these great groups that we can go in that are already in communities that we can connect other city agencies to as well.
Well, that's great to hear. Particularly, I like specifically remember that conversation about folks volunteering in their houses of worship, and didn't think of that as volunteerism. And I kind of think of a funny story of one of our input sessions that Jennifer gave about like how, after at Bethany Baptist Church in Brooklyn, after service, she was responsible for cleaning and everything in between to make sure. So she knew every corner of the church, and that was like voluntold, right, Jennifer, in those
I
days.
like that.
But it gives an insight to like how people would bring their commitment to certain things, and how they are able to like manifest that into other ways of like service and volunteerism, and giving input to things that they want to see change in their community. And I think that was really evident, actually, going back to Bethany, was one of our input sessions in Brooklyn some time back. So I just wanted to kind of play on that a little bit, and just like how like an input session that we had at Bethany guided our work, and kind of got us where we are in our ballot measures for the Racial Justice Commission.
I'd love to jump in here and just say a few words about that. And before I do, just say that, in this moment in time, one of the things that we really need to center on is our language, the words that we use. And so just even the term volunteer connotes, a lack of, or not the necessity of being engaged. Right? Whereas if we are engaged in service and not volunteerism, then it takes on a different element of like participation and responsibility, one to another. If I'm volunteering to help you, then it's something I don't really have to do. But if I see it as like service is the rent that you pay on this earth, right? That it's my responsibility to serve and be a part of community, then I'm coming with a different mindset, a different attitude, a different disposition. Language is so critically important in this moment. And I'm just going to tell you, as we seek to do more and more around racial justice, I'm looking forward to the day, and hopefully it comes before 2030 something, when the quote minority becomes the majority, that we disband this use of the word minority to refer to people of color. Because again, it stigmatizes and creates a mindset that those who are people of color are less than those who are white. And so, we just need to lean in and pay more attention to language. Forgive me, I just had to put that in there. Let me just bring it back to the commission for a moment and say that the community's voice was so critically important, first and foremost, because what we appreciated in our Racial Justice Commission work was that we have been struggling here in this nation. We have been challenged by racism since its birth, beginning before slavery, with the taking of land, by white persons, taking the land of Native Americans, right? The indigenous persons. That was a form of racism. And then it persisted and has persisted in all the years since. And so one of the things that we had to appreciate was that the commission was not going to upend racism. 400, 500 plus years of racism in 6-7 months with a few ballot proposals for New Yorkers to vote on. And so as we heard from the community, a multitude of challenges, experiences that pointed very directly to policies and programs based in laws that were and are inherently racist and designed to keep them from getting ahead. What we realized was that we would be doing all New Yorkers a disservice if we centered on just a specific or a concrete policy or law. If we just looked at policing only as an example, then we would pretend we would essentially would be positing that racism does not exist in education, in healthcare, in child welfare services, in the siting of hospitals versus jails, like stand up, like good health clinics versus shelters that people don't want in their homes. I mean, in their neighborhoods, etc. If we just centered on one issue, we would be ignoring the lack of access to capital for Black and Brown communities, the rights that are denied immigrants, if we just centered on one issue or one area. And so what we sought to do was to make racial equity a core functioning of government forevermore by creating an Office of Racial Equity and having it be embedded in the charter. That's going a step farther, a significant step farther than an executive order that establishes an Office of Racial Equity. Because you know what? Our current mayor is committed to establishing an Office of Equity. But what happens when he's no longer in office? The next mayor gets to come along and say, yeah, I'm not really feeling that Office of Equity. We're going to get rid of it. Or you know what? I'm going to starve it of critical resources. But if you establish an Office of Equity centering on race as the foundation for all of these inequities, and that is what is the case in America, a system of racism, capitalism, militarism, all working to continually oppress people of color by design. If you center on the charter that sets the laws and is the guidepost for what government should be doing, if you build equity into that charter, it becomes a mandated, not just goal, but function of New York City government. So that's what we did. We took their experiences, we learned from them, and we put specifics in this proposal that speak to wage and occupation segregation, that speak to hiring and promotion practices, that speak to looking at disaggregated data in every government function and agency, and requiring these agencies and government on the whole to be accountable. But we did it by making it more foundational because we heard so much about the varied issues, and it wouldn't do the people of New York City a good service if we just said it's one particular issue.
Absolutely. And and it was critical for the commission to make sure that all of those voices were centered around how we look at structural inequity in the city. And and our ballot measures that voters will vote on, they will decide whether or not these ballot measures can bring forth greater equity to our society. And so and that's why we want to make sure that folks are participating and learn more to decide whether or not those three ballot measures by the commission will further racial equity in our city. So no, that great points on that. And I know concurrently, we have NYC Speaks, that is looking at ways where the public can shape policy. And so so I pose a similar question to you, Dr. Blake, on specifically with NYC Speaks, how is input bringing forth the policy ideas.
Well, let me just first start off by saying that there's so much alignment with the work that Dr. Austin is doing with the Racial Justice Commission. NYC Speaks looks to reach out and to get community input from those communities that have been most marginalized, those communities that suffer from the greatest amount of disparities. And like the Racial Justice Commission, we're looking at not just one particular institution, right? So if you look at our areas of issue areas, I would say, you would see that we're looking at climate and infrastructure, housing and neighborhoods. We have racial justice and equity as an issue area, public safety, health and wellness, arts and culture, workforce development and economic vitality. Like, we're looking at all of these different areas, because for each of the areas that I'm listing, there's an agency that represents those areas. And so this is a real voice to the voiceless moment, a real speaking truth to power. Because if we talk about, like Dr. Austin talked about, institutional racism, the very first form of institutional racism in America was slavery, because slavery was an institution. So Black, brown, and immigrant communities have always been impacted by institutional racism. So what better opportunity but to get those communities that suffered these great injustices and inequities, to give them an opportunity to speak to the very agencies that still shape the things that happen in their community. So, this concept of community input is also a concept of community empowerment, because communities have to know that they have a place to place their grievances. They have a place to share what they think the solutions are. And that's what NYC Speaks aims to do. It really is about reaching out into communities that have no trust for government because of the historic nature of their experience with government, and saying, hey, no, we want to hear from you. We want to build a relationship with you that is a paradigm shift. And then you couple that with the work that's happening on the Racial Justice Commission in the form of a charter. Now you have a way in which to hold everyone accountable, but also to increase the participation and the input of the community. And I just want to say that, currently, right now, we are involved in completing our survey distribution. And I would love for individuals to go to nycspeaks.org and fill out that survey. You're going to find that the questions are very comprehensive. They're policy driven, because this is not an opinion poll. This is about what are the solutions that you want to see around the areas that we just addressed. And I can tell you the feedback has been exciting, refreshing to see this type of approach to bring those voices into the fold. But I have to be very honest with you and say that there is a cautious optimism, because when you have suffered at the hands of these agencies historically, there's this level of, is this for real? Is this really happening? And so our process is not just about the development of an instrument in terms of a survey, but it's about going back into those communities to now go into those communities with the findings of the research, and not have outside institutions or universities disaggregate the data, but go back to the people themselves and ask them, did we get this right? What questions did we not ask? And so our whole approach is to bring communities together in community conversations and collect that data, which will then go into what we call an action planning that will be presented to not only the Eric Adams administration, city council, the 5 borough presidents, so that there can be some real conversations and some suggestions made to the administration. Now, the key component to all of this is when people begin to see their voices reflected in the decision making and the policies, then trust will begin to happen. I like to say, in our closing this, that COVID did not cause, it only magnified for some and exposed to others the historic inequities that have existed in the impact in terms of Black, brown, and immigrant communities. So we are and have to understand the moment that we're in. We're in a moment of great distrust. And it is not the responsibility of the people to come to government. It is the responsibility of the government to show that they're willing to listen, participate, and engage with the people to create real systemic change, not in a paternalistic way, but in a way that's rooted in collaboration and partnership. And that's what NYC Speaks aims to do. And that's what has brought me personally to this project. We were talking about quote unquote volunteerism or service earlier. I started my young entry into civics was organizing as a community organizer, and I know the value of service and what it does to cultivate you as a person, what it does to develop leadership skills in you and allow you to gain access. And there's so many of us who have so many things that we want to say, but we don't know where to place our grievances. But through service, you become knowledgeable, you become educated, and you become empowered to make real decisions in your community. And so we hope that not only will government reach out to the people in a new collaborative manner through this process, but we also hope that those community members who have often felt like there's no need to participate become reignited, empowered, and move closer to using their voices to create systemic change in the way in which government relates to them.
Thank you for that. Yeah, and when we talk about just how we receive the input and everything, I know from my experience, and I love Commissioner Castro to particularly lean in on this, and then I know we got a little bit of time left, but there's different ways how we bring folks in, and every community is so different, and in the ways of like how we communicate, how we actually hear voices in culturally responsive matters. So I actually want to just take a few moments to talk about that and pivot that to young people as well. And Laura and Sarah, please jump in as well on that question as well. But I will start with Commissioner Castro.
Well, thank you, Harold, for that question. Since you bring up young people, I think it, I grew up in New York City. I grew up in Sunset Park, predominantly immigrant neighborhood. I grew up undocumented. I came here with my mother when I was 5, and so much of what I remember and so much of what I hear from other folks, in our communities, how much we had to step in as children to support our parents, access government services. And, that's always top of mind, when we're discussing how do we reach out to the community, because it's so important for not just Moya to recommit, but all city agencies to recommit to language access and culturally appropriate or responsive services. We're not an English-only city. The mayor has said this. Others have said this. We have to recommit to making sure that our immigrant communities, especially newly arrived immigrant communities, are able to access critical services and information in their own language. This goes far in building trust, but it's also a life and death situation. As we've seen in a lot of the critical issues that have come up, whether it's the Bronx fire, hate crimes, and so on. If folks don't have the appropriate information, or they have misinformation and they don't know how to access, like, let's say, emergency services, it can be detrimental to the communities. And ultimately, like, the children shouldn't have to be their parents' interpreters for everything. It's something that I remember growing up being such a important part of my life, but it always reminded me that we didn't belong, right? And that shouldn't be the case in the city, because ultimately the city is a city of immigrants. Again, there's over 100 languages and dialects spoken here, and we have to encourage people to continue to use their languages in public spaces, at schools, at homes, because frankly, if we're going to really challenge structural racism, hate crimes, the over policing of our communities, we have to encourage our communities to also embrace their cultures and in their languages in all public spaces in their communities. So it's something that's very meaningful to me. This week I've been celebrating Lunar New Year with many communities, and I see children and families out. And at the same time, we're making sure that they have the information that they need at these events from staff that come from the community themselves, which is, the thinking behind hiring me as someone who had grown up undocumented in an immigrant community. And I hope that's not the last we've seen in terms of appointments and hires in this city, in this new city government. So I'll leave it at that. Those are some thoughts, but I think recommitting to language access and culturally responsive services and agencies is critical for us in the city government.
Very, very well put. Yeah, well, I want to make sure that people take away that, having cultural responsive engagement is critical for us to have a really engaged society. I know we are running short on time, but I do want to hear from Dr. Sayeed and Laura as well. Particularly want to talk a little bit about our youth engagement work and tips, ideas of, where, how we actually are want to engage our young New Yorkers to influence city government, since many of them are not able to vote because they're under the age of 18.
I can just get started really quick. As I mentioned, we did run a participatory budgeting process last year, focused specifically on youth. Youth from 9 to 24 were running this process. It was actually a youth-led project, and we had them identify their needs. And based on the needs they identified, CBO, community-based organizations, developed proposals that then young people voted on. And we had over 2,000 people participate in this process. But this is an example of a process that can bring young people under the age of 18 into the fold. Public schools are running participatory budgeting in the schools. When CEC runs citywide participatory budgeting, the charter currently says that youth 16 and above can participate, but we're actually going to have a public change of rule and change the rule from 16 to 9, hopefully, with public feedback on that. So, and also people can register to vote as early as 16, right? And, build on their voter engagement and voter knowledge leading up to age of 18. So I think there's lots of ways that we can encourage young people to connect.
I think that that is great because I know I have a soon-to-be 8-year-old and very opinionated and very astute in the political discourse in the city, and I know he can't wait to have a greater voice in the process. So the younger, the better. Laura, I want to get your thoughts as well.
Absolutely. So the couple things, that really come to mind in our work is we do have a program. Our New York City Youth Leadership Council program is for youth 14 to 21. And sometimes it goes a little above and beyond. Sometimes it's middle school or a little bit older youth. And with that, we have 115 councils across the city that are housed in and are hosted by city agencies, schools, nonprofits, and even in NYPD precincts and PSAs, the public service areas that are in NYCHA residences. And this was founded 8 years ago because of the premise of youth are so disproportionately affected by issues in the city, but have the least say in it. So this brings youth to the table in these councils. And we really work with the councils throughout the year to develop actions around policy and practice. So helping, especially with city agencies, looking at their policies and their practices. So how they can make them more friendly for youth, how they can take youth input in. Because I think one of the things people don't remember and recognize is that youth are community members with very much as lived experiences as adults in the communities that they're in.
Yeah.
So I think that for us was a huge piece of that. And so you can go to our website, which is nyc.gov/service. And both youth to apply for councils. We still have councils that are accepting youth at this point. And also if you're a community group or even a group of youth who wants to start your own council, we have a whole guide there that will help kind of develop and pace help people figure out what to do, to investigate what and decide what the need is, and then to create an action plan around it. And then the one final thing I will say quickly is that it's never too young to engage students in service, and taking note on using service instead of volunteerism, because I completely agree with that sentiment. That it's never too young, that families can take their young children and go to something in their neighborhood and serve together. And that's where you're really able to talk with your kids. You're really able to, it can be really powerful. As Dr. Blake said, these early experiences that really formulate the idea that you have the power to do something in your community, and that families can share that value, that we're here to really help represent and help make things better in our communities as well.
Thank
And I
you.
just add one thing to that, just in the spirit of what we're talking about in terms of engaging young people. We did, in our process, partner with organizations like New York City Department of Education, Division of Youth Services, to create an NYC Youth Speaks, paralleling the same questions that we're asking the adults for the very specific point of bringing young voices into the conversation. And so we're working with high school students in New York. They're filling out the survey simultaneously, and they're weighing in and have a lot of interesting things to say about things that we think that they wouldn't necessarily be connected to. They're talking about climate, infrastructure, transportation, things that impact them. So just want to say shout out to those agencies who are working with us to make sure that we bring youth voice into this conversation.
Oh no! Shout out to them, and shout out to the Youth Advisory Board that the Racial Justice Commission we spoke with yesterday. They're coming with their own policy positions, and they want to learn more about the work of the RJC. So there's a lot of great work happening out there for our young people. I know we are past the time, but I just want to give a thank you to everyone listening. I want to have folks be mindful that NYC Speaks survey completes on the 11th. So it ends this week. The 11th is on Friday. So you have till Friday to complete the survey. Carve out some time, and make sure you fill it out as much as you can, because it's very critical. This year, we're going to have an election. And on the ballot, we have 3 ballot measures. Please go to the Racial Justice Commission website to learn more about the Statement of Values, a preamble for our city charter, the Office for Racial Equity, along with a commission, and 3, a true cost of living standard that we want to establish. Those questions will be on the ballot for the November 2022 election, and you'll hear a lot more from the Racial Justice Commission in the coming months about that. For NYC Civic Engagement Commission, please stay in touch with the commission on civic engagement activities happening around the city, participatory budgeting, voter registration drives, and many other activities to bring in more participants into city government is happening. And just please stay in touch, and with NYC Service as well. If you care about your city and want to serve your city in various ways, NYC Service is a great place to connect and work with city government to connect with service projects that helps better our city overall. And to learn more about how immigrant communities can be more engaged in government, um, Mayor's Office of Immigrant Affairs is a fantastic vehicle to connect immigrant communities to New York City government, and making sure service delivery is happening in communities across the city. So please reach out if you have any questions or want to be more involved in that process as well. This is about those who are interested in getting involved in civic engagement and activities around the city. These are ways you can do so. And so please take this time, take the opportunity to participate, learn more about the work that's happening amongst the agencies and initiatives that are going on. And I just want to thank Sarah, thank Laura, thank Manuel, thank Dr. Blake, thank Jennifer for a great discussion today. And again, those who are watching on StreamYard, thank you. Twitter, thank you. Facebook, YouTube, thank you. And you will hear from us very soon. So please have a great afternoon. Take care.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.